Hey everybody, welcome back for another Journey on the Fly, the podcast. Tonight, as always, I am excited to talk to our guest. This is our second of hopefully 3 episodes where we're doing a series on steelhead fishing again. This time, though, I'm talking to some experts. You don't just get to hear me gab. Sorry. Right. Anyways, tonight we're talking to a recent friend of mine, and I'm going to mess her name up, and I'm so sorry, Ari, but this is Ari Capotis. Ari is a wonderful girl, very active in the world of fly fishing, specifically for steelhead fishing and others. She goes by Keystone Fly Girl, which I love. She is born and raised in the Erie area, married, lives there, fishes there, guides there, educates there. Tonight we're going to talk specifically about fly fishing, but later episode we're going to do with Ari to talk about her and about her involvement with women in fly fishing that all of us can get some inspiration from. Remember, you can find this on all the major stations, as they say: iHeart, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube. Find us, share us, and please, my friends, if you're enjoying the content, message me, leave some comments in these areas, and please leave a review so other people can find us. All right, let's get at this. So, Ari, give us a little bit of, take a minute or so and just give us a little bit of your background. Who is Keystone Fly Girl in relation to Erie steelhead fishing?
Well, I would say that I am a younger guide in the region, that I'm more so focused on a community and seeing a viable fishery that's going to last well into the future. What really pulled me into steelheading in general was actually my papu, Chris. Papu is Greek for grandfather, and I would go steelhead fishing with my papu, Chris, when it would be like the temperatures it is right now, mid-20s. We would be out there. So I think that the first targeted steelhead I landed with my papu was in 2009. And from there, I've always looked forward to the annual fall run. And it wasn't really till I got to Allegheny College. I graduated in 2016. So my senior year, Adam and audience, I was introduced more so to fishing for steelhead in the streams proper. So went from lakeshore and lake base to fishing for them when they're actually running up the tributaries. And then from there, I haven't stopped chasing them. Regarding fly fishing, Adam, I know I'm a born and bred Erie girl. So when I first was fishing, it was putting an emerald shiner onto a yellow perch rig. And that was I love doing that to this day. I'll go fishing any style you want, especially if we're going to be out on the big water. So really from perch and fishing in general, got the bug with steelhead. And to this day, once we're done with steelhead in the spring, I'm still going to be chasing smallmouth bass and suckers in the tributaries. And then once it's kind of the end of the stream season in Erie, that's when you can actually, if you go later in the evening, you can catch walleye from shore pretty darn easily. I think the Sons of Lake Erie does a great job with public access, especially right in the city of Erie. So you can fish the city side, as they call it, or you could fish from the peninsula. You can fish all throughout Presque Isle Bay. So it's just, I would say that in simplest terms, Adam, Ari Capotis is my name and Keystone Fly Girl is my game.
I love it. Well, there's a ton that I could go 16 different ways with that you just said, but I will rabbit trail just a little bit on the walleye, because the conversation I had last night that we recorded, I was always questioning this, and being that you're born and raised, maybe you can answer this a little bit in more specific terms. So we know there's this, excuse me, on the river that's out in Ohio that I always forget the name of. There's this giant run of walleye up that stream.
The Maumee River?
The Maumee. Thank you so much. Why do you think, or maybe you know this in particular, we don't see that in any of the other tributaries necessarily?
Well, I think that an Ohio biologist would be the best, Adam. But I mean, the one thing to really take a look at is that we know that the bulk of the walleye are going to be breeding on the Western Basin.
Okay.
So that right there, most of the breeding activity is going to be taking place over there. But the fact that the Maumee River is such a tremendously large watershed, it's not going to be the same issues, especially in the Erie particular tributaries. As you know, depending on the time of year, nothing could even get into the creek mouths because they're kind of closed off from the tributaries. But I would say that because of the bulk of the spawning taking place on the Western Basin, that's really why. It's really cool if you want to interview Pete Alex. He's actually the president of the Erie, Pennsylvania Sportfish Association. He worked with Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission, and I believe Sons of Lake Erie as well. And they actually did a recent wire tagging study on the walleye. We absolutely do have resident populations here in the Eastern Basin, but the bulk of the walleye are going to be traveling throughout the year. So they spawn over in the Western Basin as it gets a lot warmer, usually like July. That's when they're going to start swimming to the Eastern Basin on our end. And that's why walleye season for us in Erie, July, August, and then really even September until the water temp starts to go down. And then the bulk of the walleye are going to then travel out of the Eastern Basin to the Western Basin.
Interesting. Because I am very walleye ignorant. I know they're delicious, but
They sure are. It's a fun game fish if you're not into going trolling for them. Okay. So my fiance, Danny, calls it a boat ride with a little bit of skill involved. I'm obviously being facetious, but jigging for them, or like what I like to do, I'm just casting a stink tip line and less than 12 feet of water, and I'm just fishing a nice Klaus or minnow on a short leader. Especially once that sun starts to come down a little bit and it's, evening time when the game fish are going to come in a little bit more shallow. It's a lot of fun, I think, because you don't know if you're going to get a walleye or maybe you're going to hook into a freshwater drum. And although I am cursing those fish if I'm trolling, they're a lot of fun on the fly rod.
Oh, man. Now you got me excited about one more thing. All right. Well, back to the steelhead. Thank you for indulging me on that. And I appreciate the info. That's actually a little bit in part what somebody answered that question last night. But then me not realizing that their spawning happens predominantly elsewhere. That's interesting. So, all right. So, tell us a little bit about these critters, about the steelhead themselves. Tell us about you mentioned viable, long-lasting habitat. So you can bring that in right now, too, because that's really important to me, and we're trying to stress that kind of thing to our audience, realizing how important our part in all that is. So tell us about the steelhead
Excellent.
themselves and their habitat and the fisheries and such.
Well, interestingly enough, especially for Great Lakes steelhead, Adam, obviously we hear the jokes, no salt, no steel. That's all well and good. But if you were to actually take a look at some of the research that Michigan Sea Grant has put out, and there is some good research that Fish and Boat was really doing at the beginning of the 2000s, we have naturalized strains of steelhead here in the Great Lakes. I think it's really interesting and dynamic that there's different strains of steelhead. Just think of them as different flavors, audience. So everybody really likes the spring run fishery in Ohio because they have little manistee strain steelhead. Those are some big paddle tail fish, and they're a lot of fun to chase. But what's interesting, at least at this time of year, and really over the last couple years, we've started to really pay attention to the strains going into the lake. But we're also having some changes going on with the stocking program here in Pennsylvania. I think it would have been fall 2024. Perhaps it was more recent than that. There was actually a VHS scare at the Tionesta Fish Hatchery. That fish hatchery is in the Allegheny watershed. It's not in the Lake Erie watershed. So what that means is we can't raise the steelhead in Tionesta anymore and then bring them back to Lake Erie and stock them.
Interesting.
Yes. So because of that change, all of the steelhead that Pennsylvania stocks are going to be coming from our Fairview Fish Hatchery, starting last spring, going forward now perpetually. Because of that, the capacity for steelhead went from 1 million every year to about 500,000. Okay, we had 500,000 coming up from Tionesta, and then Fairview was doing a little bit under 500,000, right around there. Between the Fairview Tionesta hatchery and then the Albion Sportsman's Club and 3CU Trout Association, those are the partners that are really stocking all of the steelhead that we have in Pennsylvania, in addition to stocking almost 100,000 brown trout. Okay. Going forward, though, Adam, instead of not using Tionesta at all, the Fish and Boat Commission is going to use Tionesta to raise about 300,000 brown trout that are then going to be put into the Lake Erie tributaries and Presque Isle Bay. So the stocking numbers for this spring we're looking at, so they're going to be starting to stock once we get through this thaw here, everybody, February, March, those are the big months that we're putting the smolts in. So if you're catching 5 or 6 inch little rainbow trout, those are smolts, and we would appreciate very safe handling. Try not to catch a bunch of them. If you are, they're all schooled up, and I highly recommend trying to go above or below, because those little buggers are going to grab your flies or whatever your offering is before the adult steelhead are almost every time. So we're going to have 300,000 brown trout, about 500,000 steelhead going forward. All of our steelhead in Pennsylvania are PA broodstock. I think actually the Fish and Boat Commission refers to them as trout run broodstock. What's interesting to me, though, so trout run is the bread and butter location for our broodstock. We actually used to collect from Orchard Beach Run, which would be out near Northeast. And then there was some collection happening at Godfrey Run. That's West County as well. So traditionally there were 3 nursery waters about a decade ago. Now, from my understanding, talking to the 3CU fellas and then the Lake Erie Research Unit, which is the Fish and Boat Commission biologists assigned to this region, Trout Run is where those fish are coming from. So if you ever come up to Erie, if you were to go to Trout Run, which is the Avonia Beach Park, you can actually walk right up to those nursery waters. There's some informational placards there, and you can actually see hundreds of steelhead at any given time, usually from about September all the way until, I would say, March or April. It's really going to depend on how much snow and ice we get up here in Erie.
And that's a really fun time just for people to kind of get their feet wet, per se, to kind of understand a small portion of the magnitude of what really begins to happen in the whole process. I mean, that's a lot of good information, and it's very interesting to me that how much effort that we all, for at least for a very long time, I didn't realize really goes into the Erie steelhead fishing, period. I mean, it's huge. There's so many hands and organizations and people and just stuff involved to making it happen, and to happen really well, and to happen hopefully for a very, very long time. I mean, the fact that we see something susceptible, or something could be susceptible to the fish, we stop that, we shift gears, and we try to make some clean actions going forward so that it will be sustainable. That's just a big deal to me, I guess.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting to me that number one, all of the hatcheries in PA have as tight a protocol as they can on not only knowing the invasive species, but treating for them, and also maintaining a disease-free environment. The brown trout eggs that we get they're Rome strain brown trout. They come from the state of New York, so they're certified disease-free. So that's why those brown trout can come up from Tionesta and the Allegheny watershed and get put into Lake Erie. And then what else I think is super interesting is the overall advisory committee for Lake Erie is part of the Great Lakes Fishery Commission. There's a Lake Erie committee that sets the annual allotment for what states and then the province of Ontario can actually stock into Lake Erie. Pennsylvania stocks the most steelhead of any community partner touching Lake Erie, to the point where I would love if we could actually get a wire tagging study to see where our fish go. It's something that I'm just tremendously curious about. And if we know that the walleye are traveling vast distances, basically from Western Basin to Eastern Basin, where are the steelhead going? And it's like, especially, I know you're up here fishing, you see that every year. Yeah. Somebody's going to catch a salmon. Might be a coho, might be a king, it might be a pink. Where did those come from?
Yes.
It's tremendous. And then over the summer, somebody caught 10-pound Atlantic salmon out in the lake. Now that definitely came from Huron because they have a great stocking program up here. But, the pinks, the king or the coho, those might not be stock fish. You got to kind of take a look at the fins here, because as much as everybody says that we're a stock fishery, I would like everybody, and I'm so glad that you brought this up, Adam, I'd like everybody to start focusing on habitat, okay? If we have good holding structure, we have good fish structure, we have mud sills to prevent siltation and severe channelization in sections of stream, then those are areas that these fish are going to congregate in, especially steelhead, depending on their genetics and the time of year. There's fish that are going to come up and they hang out in the tributaries for 4 months. There's other fish that come up and they go up as far as they can, as quick as they can. They get their business done and they go right back out to the lake. So if we had better habitat throughout the streams, I think that, number one, we wouldn't have to stock such an incredible amount of fish every year. Number two, we'd save money from that. And then, number three, we could stop this madness with the fish ladders. I am very much against fish ladders in Erie County, okay? We have shale streams here. We have shale and slate bottom streams. Once you get a little bit higher on them, depending on the stream, you're going to finally have some nice spawning habitat, some pea-sized gravel, some mud banks, some sand banks, the type of habitat that could actually be conducive for natural reproduction. Okay. Doing fish ladders as passage systems, I do not agree with. Okay. We have crazy shelf ice. There's all kinds of stuff that gets flushed into our tributaries because they are freestone streams. If we're not getting rain, they don't have flow. The term I usually hear around here is flashy, right? So if we know they're flashy streams, I just don't understand why we would want to spend 6 figures on a fish ladder that not only does it get clogged up, but it gets clogged up to a point that, some of these passage systems in the region, they'll close them during high water events. If they know a storm's coming in, they're going to close both of the 4-mile fish ladders. I understand the reason why they do that. It makes sense to me that they don't want to have to dig out pounds and pounds of silt and mud and whatever else got jammed down into the ladders during the runoff event. I get that. What I don't get is why we spent all that money to do that, to then have to manage that, when if we had, just cut some holes in the slate like they did on the very first hole on 4 Mile, those fish can now get up no matter what, and we don't have maintenance for our overworked WCOs in the area. We don't have a lot of waterways conservation areas assigned to us in Erie County, let alone northwestern Pennsylvania in general. So I'd like to save money, because doing mud sill projects and stream improvement is going to cost way, way less than a fish ladder.
I love that. And I appreciate you saying that, because, and you also mentioned doing habitat work. You mentioned a couple. Give us a couple ideas, because I love telling people, here's the situation, here's what needs to be done, but what can we do? Like, how can we participate? How can people get their hands dirty, per se, to help with stream improvement? Maybe they're a landowner along the systems, or maybe they're just somebody that frequents it or doesn't frequent it, but takes that week off every year. And it's like that sacred week of steelhead fishing. And what could they and all of us be doing to make some of these improvements?
Love it. Well, I would say that the easiest thing for everybody to do would be to join as a member of the PA Steelhead Association. They are a wonderful nonprofit organization here in Erie County. They were formed in 1996 by local steelhead anglers that were concerned about a rash of postings on a lot of the streams that they were frequently fishing. So the mission statement of the PA Steelhead Association, and I'm going to paraphrase here a little bit, is to improve and enhance the steelhead fishery, okay? Every single year, the Steelhead Association is one of the hosters of the International Coastal Cleanup. Their assignment area is the Walnut Creek access region. It's always in September. So if you're ever interested in doing a cleanup in September, that is an annual event. I'd like to shout out Sam Zachor and Rich Sherwin from the Steelhead Association. Sam has been a fantastic coordinator for the ICC cleanup, and I love that he puts in the statistics of how much garbage is cleaned up and prevented from hitting the lake. So if you're willing to join as a member, that would be fantastic. If you want to come up for the ICC cleanup, even better. But if at all you're interested in helping to stock fish, that's another option. And I highly recommend emailing info@PA Steelhead Association, info@pasteelheadassociation.com, and let them know that if you're in the region, you'd be more than willing to help them with feeding fish, shoveling snow off of raceways, or even stocking fish. Now, specific to stream improvements, I would like to see bank stabilization projects and mud sill projects, okay? If you were to look at what the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy has been doing, especially in the Lake Erie region, they've done a lot of work on the Elk Creek Preserve. So on Elk Creek, which is the most popular stream in Steelhead Alley in Erie County, because it is the most heavily stocked, there was about, I don't want to misquote myself here, but it was a multi-million-dollar fundraising project that was done. And what they did is bank stabilization above the Conrail tubes on Lower Elk Creek. In addition to doing the bank stabilization with rock and stone, and they really did it right. And obviously this is way more money than the $100,000 ladders I was bashing, okay? That section of Elk Creek used to be a mud pit. It is not. It's now fish holding structure. There's mud sills that were built into the bottom of this, in effect, a rock wall that was built to stabilize the bank. I mean, it's just a stellar section of creek now. And because it has fish holding structure, and because these steelhead are so hard to see, you will be pleasantly surprised fishing for smallmouth bass in the springtime, especially areas where they have done habitat improvement. The Northwest chapter of Trout Unlimited. Now we're talking pre me being involved, so over a decade ago, Adam, they did a lot of stream bank improvement on Upper Elk Creek and to some of the feeders in it. Those sections are still excellent. They have depth, they have structure, and I know I keep going back to the mud sills, but I just can't believe how well they work with slowing down the stream velocity, so you don't have to worry about banks getting torn away. But there's actually fish structure built into them. Okay. So it's now, in addition to making sure that it's not going to be a section of creek that is going to be completely different 5 years because of the damage from runoff events. In addition to not having to worry about that, you know that there's going to be fish holding there. I can't say enough about it. Yeah, I'd really like to see a little bit more of a focus on structure and stream habitat improvement. So Walnut Creek is a great example, okay? I just want to go back to the fish ladder thing, and I want to talk about how there could be other stream improvements that are done instead.
Please.
So on Walnut Creek, there is a hole that's known as the Manchester Hole. Okay, it's really quite an impediment of a shale waterfall. The issue is that there's not enough depth below the waterfall for these steelhead to really get momentum. Okay, so steelhead can jump incredible barriers, whether it's actually wild Pacific Northwest steelhead where they're from, or our wonderful Great Lakes strain of steelhead. Regardless, they have an incredible ability to jump. But if they don't have depth in the pool, they can't get that 6 feet up. They can't get that 8 feet up. So that's the issue facing that section of Walnut Creek. But when there's high water events or any sort of flow, fish are able to jump that impediment, no problem whatsoever. To the point where when Tim Wilson, who is going to be speaking this evening for the Steelhead Association, was shocking some of the upper reaches of Walnut and its feeder streams, he was finding wild steelhead par. Okay, so
Wow.
quite clearly they're traversing this waterfall, but because there is really no fish holding water or structure immediately above that falls, it's to the observant angler, these fish are just simply not getting above it. If they were there in the evening time or a high water event, they're going to see these fish go over the falls and they keep on trucking because there's nowhere for them to rest. Okay. Once they make a big jump or they've really worked themselves, they need to hang out and recuperate a little bit. Okay. So hot tip for the listeners, it's early fall and you come up on a pool and you like see their the top of their tails hanging out and their heads down. Those fish are trying to take a breather. I'd leave them alone. I'd go find somebody in the riffles that actually wants to eat your offering. So with regard to walnut, I'd like to see some habitat improvement going on. There's great water up above. And like I said, you know, if some of those steelhead are having success in the feeders to it, clearly they're getting up there, you know. And one thing, too, I want to bring up, if when we take the milt and the eggs from the brood stock they're netting from Trout Run, which they just did a collection about a week ago, when they do that egg and milk collection, when they go to the actual Fairview Fish Hatchery and get all that stuff all mixed up, those eggs have an incredibly high hatch rate. Obviously, things are in ideal condition in the hatchery, but if those same fish they're netting and then milking or grabbing or stripping the eggs from are successful in the hatchery, I don't understand why people wouldn't think they could be successful out in the streams themselves.
Right.
That's always been a challenging point for me to wrap my head around. And then especially being involved with Trout Unlimited and having the opportunity to bend Tim Wilson's ear or maybe, you know, listen to what he has to say. Or if ever I can hear Joe Brancato from Pennsylvania DEP speak, I always go listen to him speak. Those guys see all kinds of incredible things in the Lake Erie tributaries. And both of those gentlemen have seen lots and lots of wild steelhead par. I would love to see the Fish and Boat Commission try to incorporate dealing with some of this wild reproduction and their stocking. Do I ever think that they don't need to stock? No. Okay, it's a multi-million-dollar sport fishery. There are thousands of anglers that come up here. I am glad that people come up here like it's the freshwater fishing capital of the world. But I would like to see some adaptation in the management. I think that some of the streams, especially in the western part of Erie County, I think that we could be looking at more regulation on them. I think that being that Crooked Creek has nursery waters on it, and it has to be treated with lampricide on a cycle by U.S. Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife, because we know that there's good natural reproduction in it. I think that that's one of those streams where maybe we should look at special regulations. Maybe you can't put 3 steelhead on the stringer. Okay. Now, I would like to put this out there to both you and the listeners. I do consume steelhead. I only consume chrome steelhead. If it's not a dime bright fish, I am not going to be taking it home to consume it. So I am picky with what I consume, but I do consume them. And I don't think that they should be mandatory catch and release because it's not a native species in Lake Erie. They were introduced in the 1800s. In the 1960s, the wily guys that founded the 3CU Association thought, why don't we round up these big lakefront rainbows and try to get a fishery going? And from there, they actually made it happen.
Wow. I don't even know where to begin. Matter of fact, I'm not even going to say much else. I just want all that to soak in with a lot of people. And I, at least on the back end of it there, I agree with you 100%. I don't bring, if I bring a fish home, it's maybe one a year, but you're 100% right. The difference between a dime bright fish and one that's all we'll say decorated up, it's a big difference when it comes to taste, but that's just me.
I agree with you.
So that's, man, if we had about 4 hours, I would love to chat more about everything that you just said, but there's so much there. All I want to say to anybody that's listening to this, take heed. I mean, just to go back a few minutes from what you said about stream cleanup. I don't live too far from the Connoquenessett, and at one point, I don't remember when, but it was rated the dirtiest river of Pennsylvania at least. It might have actually been a little broader of a rating. The amount of trash that in a day or two of cleanup, it was tons, not pounds, tons of just tires alone that had come out of that stream. We just don't realize it. Stuff we don't see, we pass by. And I mean, I was with a client one time and I had picked up, this was a couple weeks ago on a mountain stream way back in the mountains in central PA where I'm from. And my nephew, I had taken him out brook trout fishing, and he sees me put this can in my net. And of course there's a can of an energy drink, like literally like 5 or 6 miles back in the wilderness. And he goes, "What are you doing with that?" I'm like, "Taking it out." I'm like, it was an opportunity for me to share with him, if you see this junk, take it out with you. Little things like that to big events that we can get involved in. I'm doing an interview with Bob Anderson from the
Little Juniata.
Yeah, Little
Wonderful.
Juniata. And I am so excited because here's the kind of duty is we weren't even like fully scheduled for our talk. And he's telling me, he goes, there's a stream cleanup coming up in spring, of course, not now. You'll freeze your, stuff off, but it's, that's the kind of duty is. I mean, all these people get a lot of slack. You're going to get slack from no fish ladder stuff, but you have valid points, very valid points. And to be fair with why I think some of these, why we don't see more attention put towards natural reproducing fish, a lot of that has to do, I know, with budget cuts. And like you said it about, your part of the country. I know that it was a few years back, but they had a massive cut in wildlife officers. And we've got the guy around us here, Tim, he covers not only Lawrence County, but sometimes 2 or 3 counties because we just don't have enough people. And on the scary side of that means there's an awful lot of people taking fish when they shouldn't be taking fish because there's nobody to do anything. And it sucks. So all that around, that's just one element of why I think we don't see more attention to it. Plus, the hoopla of the normal side of all of it that we're so used to gets so much attention that it's difficult. But I'm glad that there's people like you gnawing on people's ears to continue to get somebody to look the other way and see that there are other options and things we should be doing.
Well, thank you. Absolutely. Hey, I think it's really important to have tough conversations. Okay. If anybody would like to challenge my version of fish ladders, I would love to be enlightened and to have a discussion about it. Okay. Especially with what I see in Erie County. I'm just talking about my immediate experience. I'm 31 years old. I work with my family at our family business. We do seasonal lawn care. So especially with working as my professional industry job, and then also being interested in volunteering on the cold water conservation through Trout Unlimited, and then cleanup projects and stocking through PA Steelhead Association, I'd like to think of myself as a pretty pragmatic and reasonable individual. So if anybody wants to discuss this stuff, I would love to talk about it. Okay. I just want to go back to the natural reproduction though. I think that all said and done, especially to maintain the level of the sport fishery that we have, we will always have to stock. As an example, the province of Ontario, they have phenomenal high quality streams, and they have more closures than we do on their steelhead streams because they have such high natural reproduction. They're still putting in about 80,000 steelhead a year. And if you were to look at the density of anglers on the north shore of Lake Erie versus the southern shore of Lake Erie, you'd be very surprised to hear that they're stocking that many fish in Ontario, but they are. Okay. Stocking is a part of the Lake Erie fishery. That doesn't mean that we can't take a look at some of these streams or feeders to streams that have the potential to be regulated differently.
Yeah. And I agree 100% with you, not just because you're on the other line here, but simply because I see it all over the state. There's arguments with the Little J, which is arguably my favorite fishery, larger fishery, I guess I should say. And there's issues with things there from stopping it from years ago and so on and so forth. But there's a level of maintenance. There's in order to fulfill the impact and to keep the industry thriving, it has to be done. It's as if we stop it, it's almost like when that snow hit all you guys, and everybody's world that had to do with fly fishing came to a screeching halt for a few days, and some for longer than it got kind of dangerous for some of the shops. It just did, because people don't realize the overhead and how much steelhead fishing affects so much of tourism in that area. I mean, it's huge. Go to the Adirondacks once, you'll find out that there's people there that have 10 jobs because when tourism is out, there's no work. And they're doing everything they can to make ends meet. So in a similar metaphor, you take that stalking away, it just isn't a magic thing, unfortunately. Plus it's going to take, who knows, hundreds of years maybe for something to be wonderful, for it to actually flourish. And can't use Little J for that as an example, because that's a turnaround stream all in itself. But
look off the Clarion, Adam. I mean, if they didn't have the AMD remediation sites there, that's a dead river still.
Yes. That's a really good point. And we don't want anybody going there. I'm just kidding.
Hey, I'll tell you what, man, if I've learned anything over the last few years, if you're remotely into reading anything, you still got to go do it, and you still got to catch the fish, huh? That's another thing.
That's absolutely true. Yeah.
I always say that to my friends when we get all upset when we go somewhere and there's a bunch of people. I'm like, hey, you don't know if they know what they're doing.
That's right. You see all these pictures of these giant fish, and well, they're not the easiest, that's for certain. And there's not a ton of them yet, but there's enough.
I love going for spring pike, and my fiance Dan really turned me on to that. Right, pike are so much fun. So like you're stripping streamers for steelhead. You see him coming for it. He's coming for it. You're running out of space. Your fly is getting way closer to the end of your fly rod. You're like, this is really bad. And then, bam, he sees you and he turns right back around. And it's absolutely soul crushing. With the pike, you keep that bad boy moving. Like you strip that fly into the tip of your rod. Before it gets to the tip of your rod, they're going to rip it and run. It's amazing. I love it. They're flashing at the end of your rod tip. But the whole reason I brought this up, I have yet to get a nice trophy pike. Okay. I can catch some good ones, some decent ones, but to go out there and get a big one, you got to put the time in.
Yeah. Yep. And that's the point, right? With so much of this, and we could take this conversation in a completely different direction. But I mean, that's the point. Like, so many people get upset. Like our motto, I guess motto is the best way to put it, is that it's not about the fish. It's not about the destination, the journey that makes you, because we want people to understand that the process. I was talking to a gentleman last night, Jack Barr, and we were recording a similar discussion. And, one of his, and I'm giving him this credit one time, one of his mentors said that too many people get the process in front of the fish, or excuse me, get the fish in front of the process. And he was talking more about casting approach and tactics, but I'm talking like overall, because yes, I want people to go out and catch fish. I want them to experience that potentially fish of a lifetime. But the fact of the matter is that there are days that we may not catch a fish, and that needs to be just as sweet of a day as if the day you did catch fish. And I know that there's people going, yeah, you're talking at your butthole there. But listen, there's days that happens. Sometimes fishing is really tough for people, and they spend the entire day spooking the fish by throwing their line on top of the water a million times. But if you can walk away having observed, camaraderie, the beauty, the sound of the water alone sometimes, or the mystery of watching insects come off of that water, and and thousands of fish are rising, and you realizing you haven't caught one, or whatever it is, those have to be good experiences too. If they're not, you're going to miss the entire point of all of this.
Hey, I completely agree. I'll tell you what, I didn't really realize the camaraderie so much of the fly fishing until I started getting involved with more women's programming over the last few years. I was always big into I'm going fishing, and if it's by myself, super. Most of the time it was. But I'll tell you what, going with a group of individuals is a lot of fun. I like doing the women's programming because ladies are definitely more focused on the process than the end game. And I think that's a beautiful thing. But, hey, it's just, I guess I would just like to bring up real quick that when you see those pictures of fish on social media, you don't know how long they were out there to catch it. You don't really know how they caught it. And they're definitely not going to tell you what fly they caught it on. Okay, that right there is why I started my Keystone Fly Girl account in the first place. I've fished my entire life. I've been hunting a good part of it too. I never have really been a look at me kind of gal. So when I have seen that, really the rise of that on social media the last few years, I kind of strive to combat that. There's pictures of me on my Keystone Fly Girl account that I'm like flat on my back because I just slipped and just rocked myself, So I just, when you see the social media, like use it to get inspired, but like if it's like upsetting you or like makes you feel like you have to go do something, take a step back and like realize that that's not the reality in your normal day to day.
Amen. All right.
Oh, Adam, we got to go fishing, man. Normally I'm with my girlfriend, Danielle Teed, and she and I are like eating snacks and making jokes. And then fishing is like maybe like the third focus for us.
Yeah. I was with a good friend of mine. He's actually one of the guys that helps guide for us sometimes. And it was really funny because it was the first time I got out steelhead fishing this year. And he was like 10 fish and I was like 2 fish. And I'm just like literally staring and like listening to him talk and like we're in conversation. And he's somehow, I do not, I can't multitask. I definitely can't fish and talk really well. So one's going to have to give up the other. And it was just hilarious because at the end of the day, I'm like, I'm really relaxed. I had a good day, but I didn't even try for fish. And so I get a little bit of what you're saying there, and it's got to be that way sometimes. So How about gear? What kind of equipment are you recommending? Do you use to get out on the water for these fish?
Like my personal preference, Adam, or what I'm probably going to put in your hand when you are
Both.
hiring me.
Both.
Okay. So you're hiring me. It's your first time going for steelhead. I'm going to put an Orvis Clearwater fly rod in your hand. It's going to be a 9-foot 8 weight. I want that stick in your hand so that fish gets tired. Okay. That's what I want in my client's hand. The reel that I'm using is actually an early 2000s Reddington reel. It's the AS78. So it's actually a sealed drag system, and it's a metal reel. It's pretty heavy duty. So I like that Orvis Clearwater. Like I said, I like the 8-weight because it's a real stick. But I think the Clearwater is a really excellent rod for the price point. I am an Orvis gal. That's my preferred brand. I use Reddington. I have some G Loomis. I also have some Temple Fork Outfitter rods. I still think that the Orvis Clearwater is the best rod you can get for the money. So that's what I'm going to recommend that's what I'm putting in your hand as my client. Now I'm out fishing. It's going to depend on what time of year. So it's October. I am out there fishing for fun. Nobody can hire me in October. That is the month for me. Why? Because when the fish leap out of the water, it's probably over my 5'3" head. I love that. Okay. Like when you set the hook in that fish and they rock it out of the water and they're tail walking, that's my jam. Love that. So it's fall. What's in my hand when we're doing that? 9-foot 7-weight. I am definitely going to be chasing fish. Okay. So that means that after a handful of fish, if they make a beeline towards the lake, I'm probably going to let them go. Okay. So it's winter time. Let's just say it's right now.
Yep.
Okay. I'm going to go out there with a 9.5-foot 6-weight. I could probably go down to a 5-weight. I know some locals that do that. I want to still make sure I have control over the fish, so I'm not going to go less than a 6-weight, but they're not going to fight the same that they do in the fall. At this time of year, these fish are cold and lethargic, and they're hanging out in the winter holding lies. So I'm using small flies for the most part, and lighter tippets. So I like the 9.5-foot rod. I have that extra 6 inches of play for my tippet, and then the 6-weight so that I don't feel like I have a log in my hand when I'm nymphing. Now we're going to go towards springtime. It's April. I might be hoping for bass and then really stripping streamers for suckers and maybe some steelhead sitting behind them. I am going to go with my 9-foot 7-weight again. Fall and spring, I'm usually trying to fish streamers. I'm not dead drifting them. I am slow stripping them, or I'm trying to emulate a sculpin. Those are like my stripping methods for fall and for the springtime. I think that 9-weight's overkill. I think that 5-weight is a wet noodle. That would be my best description. I really hear commonly like a 10-foot 7. I have 2 10-foot 7s. I love them. Like they're great rods, but a 10-foot rod is a long pole.
It is. I think the 10-foot, because I've moved into a 10-foot in almost all my rods, just across the board for everything. And one of the biggest reasons are, especially when I put them in the hand, for a client when mending and things like that are really important. It just makes it just a little bit easier, especially for the beginner. But it also, because it is a longer rod, it gets us into some little bit hairier situations on times. Not so much in the tributaries up there, but other places that we take people. And that's just something that I've personally navigated to. And I think probably most of the time there's a little bit more tippet protection, and that's why people push that 10-footer. But it also depends on the rod. I mean, the rod could be a broomstick, and it doesn't matter how long the thing is. But
Very true. Very true. I haven't fished with the Jeff Blood rods, but his tapers and the length, you might want to check that out, Adam.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, he was set up. I need to reach out to Jeff again. I'll see him in a couple weeks at the one show, but he had promised me a discussion, but I don't want to overwhelm everybody, and I want to keep some good fresh voices such as your own out there in the front when it comes to steelhead fishing and other things, because I think it's important.
Thank you.
You are welcome. So here's the one question that you kind of alluded to a little bit: fly selection. You're much more forthcoming than most people. I said this on another discussion. I worked at a fly shop for a while, and when steelhead season comes around, it is a frenzy because some person is standing here watching somebody up or downstream catch fish left and right or whatever, however they describe it, and they insist they have to have the fly that person was using. What say you and your own fly selection when you're out there chasing these critters?
For steelhead, Adam,
Yes.
I'm definitely going to get some folks upset at me for this one. Okay? It don't matter. It's how you're drifting it. Are you feeding the fish how they want? That's what I'm concerned with. And that's the big thing I try to emphasize. Okay? There's a couple flies that are bread and butter Hail Mary flies for me. I will tell you this. I do not believe in using beads. If you are paying me good money and you want to fish a bead, I will tie that bead on for you. If I have my druthers or we're out fishing for fun, no, never. Don't ask. Don't bring it up. I'm going to lie to you and tell you I don't have a bag in my bag. Okay? That is not a fly. You don't have to know what you're doing to drift those well. They're all beautifully neutrally buoyant. Those trout beads in particular, I think that was really the first bead on the market. There's no way to drift them bad. Like, unless you have an enormous loop in your floating line and you have your floating line sitting on the water surface and you can see the drag, like, there really isn't a way to impart drag on those beads. So I just want to throw that out there. That being said, going back to the drift, I think that 9 times out of 10, if somebody's beating up the fish above you or below you, it's literally because your flies are not in the strike zone.
All right.
I believe that. Now, if the water temperature is above 40 degrees and it's the early fall and they're not eating what you're offering and you're like pretty sure your drift is pretty good, yeah, you need to switch what you're using. But before I switch anything, Adam, I'm going to switch how I'm fishing it. If that means adding another split shot, I will. If that means trying to really pile my cast in there together so it slams down through the water column, I'll do that too. I do think that the way that you're casting and delivering your flies into the water affects their immediate drift. So that's something that I look at. Now, I do have a fly selection program depending on the time of year. Okay. So in the fall time, streamer heavy, bait fish heavy, I actually have started goofing around with alewife looking patterns. The alewife population in Lake Erie was what was cited for why the salmon program was ended in the late 90s, early 2000s. I would argue that in conjunction with that, they had a bit of a gene concern with the coho. They had short gill plates towards the end of that program, and I think that was a contributing factor with the high mortality and the bad return rate. But nonetheless, okay, alewives I do use, and emerald shiner patterns in particular. Okay, so that would be Carl Wexelman's Little Precious, and then Jeff Blood's White Death. Now, both those patterns, I would emphasize that they need to be impressionistic. Okay, you're not in their face that it's an emerald shiner. It's the impression of an emerald shiner. When I have streamers on for clients that are the impression of a bait fish, or even for myself, I have fish turn around for these patterns. Okay, obviously when it's 30-degree water, no trout is going to move very much, no matter how fancy the fly is. But if it's early fall for steelhead and Erie, if it's a good pattern, they will completely turn around and chase it and gobble it up. So once we get to wintertime, I'm nymphing at them. Big on the stoneflies. Okay, we do have an early black stonefly hatch. We're not there yet timing wise. It's going to be coming up here. But if you're fishing in February and you see these little black dots on the snow drifts along the bank, those are stoneflies. And if you were to tie on a stonefly of a comparable size, we're talking like 18 or 20, which I understand sounds incredibly small. These fish gobble them up, okay? These steelhead are keyed into the bugs in the streams, especially in Erie County. That means that they are going to be keyed in on caddis, midges, and stoneflies. We don't have the big meaty stoneflies like you do in central Pennsylvania, where you might be like, holy smokes, that's the size of my thumb. Not going to see that up here, okay? But we do still have stoneflies. A good pattern to emulate this early black stonefly that I'm telling everybody about, I would go and I would look up Tight Lines videos on YouTube. It's Tim Flagler's YouTube channel, and he has an early black stonefly pattern that's a very easy tie. And you're going to be like, that doesn't really look very good. But if you were to fish that in February for steelhead, you would be very pleasantly surprised, okay? So wintertime, probably putting on some sort of egg and a stonefly. Once we start to get towards spring, these fish are sick of eggs. If it's not a sucker spawn egg, I would not tie it on the end of my line once we hit April. Like, April is the end of glow bug season, in my personal opinion. And then I would say that my favorite pattern to fish in the springtime, regardless of whatever I'm targeting in the Lake Erie tributaries, is going to be something that's going to emulate a goby. Gobies are an invasive species to Lake Erie. They're actually from the Caspian Sea, but if you were to put a goby next to a stream sculpin, you would be like, they look the same. They look very similar, not the same, but any sort of sculpin goby imitation, that's going to be money for you, especially in the springtime, because everything's trying to spawn in the spring, and the gobies are the bane of all sport fish's existence in Lake Erie. Brown trout smash them. Smallmouth hate them. Steelhead hate them. Everybody hates them and eats them. And the suckers will eat them too.
Interesting. That's interesting with the suckers.
I almost wonder if it's because the suckers are more of a bottom-dwelling species. I think that they're seeing these gobies all of the time, and I think that it's more so a predatory response because they're up the streams to spawn. But I have had suckers, especially if I'm stripping a streamer down below the riffle where you can see that they're getting into the mix. You go down below, usually there'll be some sort of hole or a run or a pocket with some depth. You have no idea what's sitting back there waiting for that sucker spawn, okay? But it's interesting to me because if I were to strip a streamer in that same thick pocket where they're sitting there waiting for the sucker spawn to come back, I've caught suckers on the strip, which is insane because you wouldn't think that they're going to be chasing that, but right. It's something that's in competition with them. And that's one hot tip. Another hot tip, second one of the interview with you. If you're really trying to get after some stubborn steelhead, you need to introduce some sort of competition factor to it. So what I like to do is I will put some sort of nymph or maybe an egg. I don't know if it's sacrilege to call an egg a nymph, but I'll put either an egg or a nymph, and then maybe 18 inches below it, we're going to get chased by a streamer. That might be an Arizona semi-sealed dubbing leech. That might be my variation of a white death. That could also be Carl's Little Precious that I have tied on. And you know what, Adam? When I fish that type of a rig, most of the time they're eating whatever the streamer is chasing. And I think that it's because it's imparting some sort of predatory response. And especially for the steelhead, they will not be beaten. Okay. If you go out and you fish early fall and you're really getting into them along the beach or the shoreline, you can actually tuck your fly rod under your arm and you can go hand over hand, and then they will absolutely be able to race and grab your fly.
Love it. That is awesome. Yeah, that's interesting to think about that as a competitive reaction there. We because it's so hard, right? Every animal in existence on this planet, we try so hard to understand, especially when it comes to any kind of sporting animal whatsoever. Everybody has their theories and ideas, and I used to joke around. One day I will have a shirt drawn up by somebody that's this trout sitting at a barista with a fedora, enjoying a cup of coffee, ready to divulge all its secrets to the fishermen across from them. And there's all these trout outside, like, protesting, and this trout's life is over because he's given it all up. And but when you see those, when you put those things into practice, I mean, it's the best we could do. I mean, it's the big $10 word. It's anthropomorphizing, right? We're trying to pretend we're that fish in a way to try to understand that fish and its in its circumstances. But that's what we do, and that's the cool part, that it works. It works in the right situations, scenarios, and conditions. So that's good stuff.
Very true.
Well, I don't want to keep you too much longer, so I have 2 more questions. Plus, I think if I ask you more, we'll be on here for hours, then your fiance is going to come looking for me, and we don't need that. So I always save this question towards the end because I think I want people to hear it even more than anything somebody said. What about safety when we're out chasing these fish, especially, obviously, Lake Erie region?
Safety.
Yeah.
That is not something that a lot of folks think of when they're steelhead fishing. So I'm very happy you brought that up, Adam. Here's a good example specific to this past weekend. I was with a fantastic group of ladies. We had a lake effect snowstorm that started last Tuesday, and it went well through Sunday. Okay, today we're talking, it's Wednesday. So because I was concerned about somebody that was crossing Elk Creek, and because we had ice shelves and the water was 30 degrees, and it would be very, very easy to take a swim and then have a life-threatening situation occur, I was very, very focused on making sure that we were wading safely and coming across the stream, to the point where somebody else hooked a fish, and I was giving instruction, and they were doing a great job fighting the fish, but my priority was still making sure that we were safely wading across the stream. Okay. Why? Because whether you have a wading belt on or not, when you get that initial rush of water down your waders, you are going to get thrown to the bottom of the creek, or you're at least going to get tossed enough that you might not know which way is up and which way is down. At least in Erie, we're fortunate enough that you might dunk in like a 5-foot hole, and then you're going to float out to a riffle section that's like ankle deep. Okay, so that's one thing that is a saving grace here. You don't have that other places. And regardless of that fact, you need to pay attention to having your feet directly under you. So I make sure I have a good wading belt on. It's cinched tight, but I'm always going to make sure that I have both my feet directly under my body. And if I feel like it's going to be icy or high water conditions, I'm going to have a wading staff with me. I do have a nice Sims collapsible wading staff. You don't need to do that. Gary Kell looks like he's repurposed some broomstick handles, put some rubber on the bottom, and then drilled a hole for him to put a rope through it. And they were great, Adam. Yes. You can be savvy and have any sort of wading stick that you want, but you got to be careful when you're in Erie because we have shale and slate, so it's very slippery. I have metal bars on the bottom of my wading boots. I also have another pair of wading boots that have carbide studs in them. I think that you need something on the bottom of your boots to help you maintain traction. I would not recommend felt for 2 reasons. First and foremost, once it's this time of year with snow on the ground, those are dangerous to walk in. As soon as you get about 3 inches of snow build up on the bottom, you're going to be like breaking your ankles. The other reason I would recommend against felt bottom is because that's a great way to transport invasive aquatic species. We are dealing with New Zealand mud snails in Erie. Luckily, we have not had any interactions with Didymo, which is known as rock snot, and we don't have Asian clams up here yet either. But both of those invasive species I mentioned are in the Pittsburgh region and in the Youghiogheny River as well. So I wouldn't use felt. I would go with metal bars or metal studs. I would also make sure, in addition to making sure you have a wading belt, a staff should you need it, and something underneath your rubber boots to make sure you have traction, I would also highly recommend having polarized sunglasses with you, okay? It's good to have that eye protection. They cannot replace your eyes, but also the polarization is going to cut down on the glare on the water, and you can see where the heck you're wading most of the time, okay? Lastly, and one thing that I'd be real surprised if this wasn't a conversation point with anybody else in the Steelhead Association. If you come up here in the fall and it's raining and you're on Elk Creek, you better make sure that you can get back across the creek the way you came before the water gets too high. Almost every year, and not this year because we had an abysmal drought this year, but almost every year the Lake City Fire Department has to rescue somebody because they were so focused on beating up the fish that they didn't realize that the water levels were rising to a dangerous level.
Yeah. I really appreciate those points. I'm glad you mentioned the wading staff and the felt boots because there's a lot of people that decide they're just going to try this for the first time and they just grab what they have. If it's early season, I would say you can get away with it if you have to, but I would still tell somebody to put studs in those shoes, but I would look very quickly to replace them for all the reasons that you said. And I always tell everybody 3 legs are better than 1. Get yourself a wading staff. I mean,
yep.
even if it's Gary style, it doesn't matter. It's going to help keep you up. And it also I use a wading staff to cross a lot of places because why should I be worried and concerned about walking any more than I need to? Just make it as safe as you can, get to where you're going to go and kind of get.
Oh my gosh, right? So I don't know about you, but if I get like real overexcited when I'm walking to the water, I feel like my legs like collapse under me. So like, especially if I'm somewhere that I'm very excited to fish and it's like remotely big water, I'm absolutely taking the wading staff for sure. Yep. And I couldn't agree more with you. Why would you want to have to focus on staying upright in the river when you could have a device that's going to help you do that without even thinking about it?
Yeah. And I'm a freaking klutz, so I need one no matter what. It's just how it is.
Well, hey man, I've taken a dunk more than once in the streams. In 2021, I was helping with the women's fishing boat program, and I was so focused on netting this lady's fish that I'm friends with and we fish to this day still, that I took one step back too far at him and I dunked in the plunge pool. I mean, like dunked. They saw my feet come up.
Gosh.
Did I net the fish? Sure freaking did. That fish was in the net, but I dunked myself to do it. So, it's easy to do, especially if you get real excited. So I guess, last safety tip, Adam, I would recommend that everybody has what I call a go bag in their car. Okay, so my go bag is a complete change of clothes, like from underwear to sports bra to wool socks, so that if I dunk myself like that, I can make a beeline to the car, either change in the car or then make a beeline to a country fair and change there. But if your clothes get wet and the water's like remotely around 50 degrees, you got to get out of those wet clothes.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. Please, please, please listen. It's not worth it. It's just not worth it whatsoever.
No. And you know what else? We're going to keep going on the safety tangent because of the ice. Okay. When we get ice up in Erie, it's like, it's all well and good to come up and break ice. How badass is that? We broke the ice for this hole and then we caught some steelhead, right? I love doing that. I've done that for years. Okay. That being said, once we start to get a warm up and there's at all free floating chunks of ice coming down the creeks, you need to be aware that that one little chunk at the wrong angle of your leg can throw you off balance. Okay. So I would pay attention to that. But my big concern would be when these ice flows and these ice dams break. Okay. There used to actually be a fish ladder at the bottom of Walnut well over a decade ago. They got ripped out by ice. That's how much ice comes down all of these creeks. And especially Elk Creek or even 20 Mile or some of these larger creeks in the region, I would be very leery to come fishing when you know that the ice is breaking up and melting and shoving down the creek. And the other reason I would be leery about that is because the banks and the areas surrounding the banks, especially if it's a mud bank, you don't know what's going to give way until all of the ice and the snow has really started to melt. So you got to be careful even just getting into the creek.
Yeah, really, really, really good points. Really good points. I think sometimes we get too excited about getting there and doing it. This is a good, just listen to what she's saying, because this is a good opportunity to just take a beat, collect yourself, make a checklist, and approach it that way. You'll probably have more fun because you'll have a little more peace of mind that you're more prepared, to be honest.
Oh my. Yeah. When you're prepared for it, it's just all the difference. And especially when we're dealing with ice or even high water events, use your critical thinking skills. If it's Elk Creek, which is like 31 miles long, the water down at the mouth could be very different than the water up towards the top of that creek. So especially when we're dealing with ice and melt and runoff, if the mouth of the creek is dangerous, maybe the middle of the creek is a little bit better. Well, the headwaters are probably going to be good. So make a game plan, keep safety in mind, but, use your critical thinking skills. Maybe you need to go to a smaller watershed. Maybe you need to go to a bigger watershed. It just depends.
That's awesome. I really appreciate that, Ari. So my final question is more of a statement that you can kind of just take off and do whatever. Any final it's two questions. Any final words, and how can people find you?
Final words, I would say that steelhead are a lot of fun to come up and catch. I would love to go fishing with you, but the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission website is a phenomenal resource to get you started with steelhead fishing. There's an actual standalone landing page. It's going to have an interactive map that shows you all of the public access points. It's going to even show you parking areas. You can print that map yourself. And there's also a PDF link where if you were to click it, it's an entire packet of all of the gear you need to actually chase these fish. So when you're asking me about my flies and my rod and reel choice, that stuff is actually broken down by the agency that helps to manage and stock these very fish. So I would say, if you want to try steelhead fishing, I would get some information directly from the agency itself. If you feel comfortable enough to use that info and come out and do it yourself, please do, but don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can always email me at keystoneflygirl@gmail.com. And I also have a standalone website. It's www.keystoneflygirl.com. I do have a link to the Fish and Boat Commission interactive map on there. And then I have some information about what I like to use when I go steelhead fishing. So I break down rods, and I also break down different methods of fishing for them. I fish for them if I can, usually with a streamer, but especially the last couple of years, I've started getting into the two-handed rods. So there's a lot of different ways you can catch them. I would just emphasize to do it the way you most enjoy it. And thank you very much for your time, Adam. I'm so happy to be able to chat about all this.
Oh boy. Oh boy. If we could get a round of applause, if there ever was such a thing for a podcast, guest, not the podcast itself, but the guest, Ari, Keystone Fly Girl, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to get to know you a little bit better and to share that with my audience. What a wealth of information she is, and what a sweet character that she has. That should be very obvious as it comes through. She's a hardworking woman. She is dedicated to this sport and to our fisheries, and for that we need to say thank you. And anybody out there that's like her, thank you. And I hope that we can all aspire to be a lot like that, to get out, get our hands dirty, to be advocates for our fisheries, not just fishermen and fisherwomen that take from it, but to give back to it. So friends, find us in all these good places. Please share this episode, and if you like the content, wherever you're listening to it, leave a comment and leave a good review. That is a quick 1-minute thing that you could do that helps this podcast tremendously. We want this thing to go big. We want the stories that we share. You know, we're pretty diverse in what we share, right? We talk about religious stuff in the fly fishing world, people's worldviews. Sometimes the worldviews come out in conversation. We talk about tactics and techniques. We talk about flies and the fisheries, and man, and I love it because that's me. That's who I am, and I feel like that's what a podcast is, right? You're kind of sharing you through a recording, chatting with other people. Anyways, as I sit here and reflect on so many good conversations, and this one in particular, thank you, friends, for listening. As always, remember, it is not about the destination. It's the journey that makes us. So enjoy it. God bless.